Aloha and welcome to Livable Hawaii Kai Hui's monthly ōlelo show, Maunalua, past, present, and future. I'm your host, Carol Jaxon, and we're here today to talk about the process of updating the East Honolulu Sustainable Communities Plan. I have with me today two guests, Bruce Tsuchida and Jeanne Ohta, and I would like to ask each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us how you got involved in the plan. So Bruce.
So I'm a professional environmental planner, and we've been doing plans for Hawaii communities for about 30 years now. And in this particular case, Hawaii Kai folks asked us to assist them with some meetings and workshops to discuss revisions to the city's East Honolulu Sustainable Communities Plan.
Thank you. And Jeanne.
I'm a resident of Haina, and currently I serve as president of the Haina Community Association, so that's how I became involved in the plan. We were asked to submit comments and participate in the development of the plan, so I was more than happy to participate and lend our community's input to the plan.
Great. And so you, as Haina Community Association's president, you became involved. And then what other groups were involved in the process? Do you recall?
Oh, there are a lot of groups. So there was Livable Hawaii Kai Hui. There was, can you think of, there were also some of the preparedness groups, which was new for this plan. So Hawaii Kai Strong, Haina Prepared.
I believe Maunalua.net, Nalu, Canoe Club, and then the League of Women Voters. And we're very thankful to them for giving us the grant in order to give we call it a stipend for Bruce's company, Townscape, to run all the meetings.
And also neighborhood board members.
Yes. From
3 neighborhood boards.
Yeah.
So I think we made it very inclusive. I liked it that we just invited whoever was interested.
Great. Yes.
I think this was a great process. Yeah. And I don't know if any of the other city plans had anything like this in terms of grassroots participation. As far as I know, no.
Okay. Well, thank you for the great lead into my next question. Can you tell us a little bit about how many plans are there and how the city uses these plans, and how did this come about?
Well, this is a little bit of a complicated story. Let's see if I can do it in 2 or 3 minutes. 20 plus years ago, the city had a different planning system. So at that time, it was called development plans for the various areas of the city. And these were very specific, TMK-specific plans that said, in the next X years, these TMKs are scheduled for development. And then they realized this may not be the best way to plan, especially since in the old style of planning, there was no community participation. This was all done by city staff with the advice probably of landowners and developers, but not community. So they decided to institute a new system. And they developed guidelines for what are called sustainable communities plans for the more rural areas of the island. So there are 6 sustainable plans. There are 2 so-called development plans for the areas that are supposed to be the main growth areas. So that's the primary urban center, urban Honolulu, and the Ewa district. But the other six districts, including East Honolulu, are supposed to be pretty stable in terms of their population and land use. So that is the new system.
Okay. And you mentioned that what we did in East Honolulu seemed to you to be fairly unique.
Well, as far as I know, because typically the city planning department does community meetings, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 during the course of plan development. The plan development may take 2 or 3 years. So you can imagine there's 2 or 3 or 4 community meetings, 30, 40 feet, maybe 30 or 50 people come. The meeting lasts a couple hours, people make comments, and that's all the community input that happens. So this was much more detailed and much more grassroots.
Okay. And Jeanne, I think you attended all of the East
did.
Honolulu meetings. And so can you tell us a little bit about that?
So actually, this was almost round 2 because several years ago, they did have community meetings, and we provided feedback. We had some interactive sessions, and we never knew what happened to all the comments that we submitted. So this plan is late, and so several years later now, we're finding that they came back to us and said, we need to meet again, and we thought we had already, but this was a good opportunity because we'd already done, the work before, and as a community realized how important it was to make comments. So, in fact, we asked the Department of Planning and Permitting to give us another chance at a meeting, and they accommodated us for a Saturday meeting, which we're thankful that they did. But we do think that there should be more time allowed for public input because, for instance, for the neighborhood boards, their process takes longer than 2 months, right? Yes. You have to appoint a permitted interaction group, and then they have to meet, and then you vote later. So I think that's one of our criticisms is the length of time that the public is allowed to submit comments.
And so Bruce, I know you've done several of these plans. Did East Honolulu have a shorter time than other areas of the island? And then also you ran the meetings, so can you give us your perspective on the meetings?
Well, I'm not sure what the calendar has been for other plans. In my experience, though, working with the city, it's fairly typical for them to spend years and years developing a plan and then providing a relatively short period of time for community reaction and review. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because although I understand the city says these plans are city plans, I truly think these plans should be community plans because you folks, you're the people who are living there and who are affected by what's decided about future uses and development. So it really should come from the community, yes. not the city staff.
Yeah. And I think they were great about extending the deadline so that we could hold our series of meetings, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But public input is required. I mean, that is part of the charter, and it's the requirement. That's what, in my opinion, gives the plan its veritas, right? Because we can say that there was community input, so this was not willy-nilly, right? Community gave in. So in order for us to give the best input, we need time to develop it, to talk among ourselves, and to actually examine. It's a detailed process. It's mm-hmm. not something you can do just by reading the plan once. You've got to go section by section. So it is, it's our future, and so that's why it's so important for us to have that input.
Yeah. So I can tell you get passionate about the plan. So give us an example of how have you used the plan in the past?
So we've used the plan whenever we're concerned about a development or something that's happening in our neighborhood. I can think of 3 areas where developments were proposed. And we were concerned because it might have been outside the urban growth boundary, which is part of the plan, or in specific instances, the plan says that development should not be in places in excess of 20% slope, and these areas were. What the plan says is that preservation is defined as those areas over the 20% slope with soil instability. And so we felt that trying to build homes in an area where we already had homes that were destroyed because of slippage was not in the best interest of our neighborhood and our community. So we used the plan to show that we've already documented in this plan that that home should not be built there.
Yes, yeah. And another good example of that is the farmers in Camilo Nui Valley that is outside the urban growth zone. And so when that was looked at to be developed, I believe we went to the plan and said, this is. I mean, you can see on the map, it's the green area with the letter A in it. So it's outside of the urban growth area, and in theory should not be slated for development. So that's a good example of the plan usage.
Yeah, I might remark that urban growth boundary or community development boundary line is a new concept for these sustainable communities plans. So that line and that idea never was in the old development plans. So there were no specific limits for development in the old development plans.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So it's a very important tool.
Yeah.
You know. The but is, but that line can be changed through petition by a landowner and ordinance by city council.
Does it give any strength to communities to have these plans when someone asks for a change like that?
Well, I think very definitely, because I think in most cases that community growth boundary has been reviewed and discussed and vetted by the community. So I think it represents, by and large, community perspective and land use understanding. So to try to change that, I think, would typically be very difficult.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, too, I think in recent years, the Supreme Court has ruled for the sustainable communities plans. And, you know, specifically what our community has experienced is when we go to DPP and object or, you know, show them the plan, they're saying, well, the plan is just advisory. When it really isn't, it's a policy. And the Supreme Court has ruled that when there's a difference in the zoning, in the development plan or the sustainable communities plan, the more restrictive plan is what should be used. So, you know, there is some law, and there's a couple of other cases. So communities need to get involved. Sometimes, you know, I wish they would, but sometimes the people at permitting don't know what's in the plan, but we do. And so I just think that if we can say, hey, we're helping out, because what we don't want to get into is a situation where we can't reverse, right? Once things are dug up or built on, you can't reverse it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do, is just protect our community.
And I think it would be overwhelming at DPP, Department of Planning and Permitting, to have to know all of that. So they rely on the community to come back to them and let them know what's in the plan.
And the people at the front lines probably know best, right? Where there may be slides, where rocks have fallen, or boulders fell, those kinds of things. Yeah.
So getting back to the process of updating this, Bruce, you were so kind to run the meetings, and you had very disparate groups at each meeting. And so can you tell us, like, how did you take all these comments and we just sat there and talked, and you organized us. So how does that process work for you when you go back to the office and after listening to us?
Well, it's a very interesting process. So as you recall, there were two of us from our company. So one person was basically facilitating the flow of the conversation, and that was Gabrielle Sham from our staff. And so my job was to take chart notes and from time to time chime in with some comments, because my history with sustainable plans goes back 20 years. And so I was able to add some perspective from time to time. But I think overall it was a great process, because we had people participating who knew a lot about their community and about important places and events and issues, and from many perspectives. So we did our best to record, and then back at the office to organize the notes in some kind of reasonably coherent way so that we could then convey those to the city.
Yeah. And you gave us a chance to look at the notes and
That's right.
make more changes. So can you maybe give us some of your takeaways from what was in the plan and what we needed to update and change from those meetings?
Well, one of the parts of the plan that I thought needed really to be changed was at the very beginning of the plan, there's a vision statement.
Yes.
Each of these plans has a vision statement. And frankly, my personal feeling was that the vision statement suggested by the city was a very weak statement. So in our last meeting, as you recall, people had lots of ideas of what a stronger vision statement might be, right?
Yes.
So we helped
Yes.
to coordinate that language and developed a suggested new or alternate vision statement for the plan.
Yeah. And I think it took us like all the first 4 of the 5 meetings to get to that point where we said, we don't think this is the right vision, and we want to update it now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vision was more demographically based, right? What the population was be, so it was more numbers. And I think we felt after, Bruce guided us was that there needed to be more heart in it. What our vision for the place that we love should feel like in the future.
Exactly. Right.
So, I can't expect DPP to write that. They don't live where we live. They don't experience it every day, and they haven't seen the changes.
Yes. Yes. So can I ask you the same question? Like, what were some of your major takeaways and things that you said, oh, phew, I'm really glad we got to update this because this is either not right or not the way we want it to be in 2040?
So some of the things were, there were things that we read it and thought, wow, where's that? Where are they talking about? Because, the local community has a name for a place. It may not be the formal name, so we were confused as to what those are, so to identify those. To also identify, at first what I was doing is looking at the new language and seeing where that may need to be changed, where I would object to that. But then I realized some of the old language was now outdated, and that needed to be changed as well. So, but I think what I really focused on is where we needed more information, where there may be more citations so that it was a more complete plan so people could understand it better, and where it could be written a little bit more comfortably. So when you read it, it read that a community was involved in drafting it.
Yes. Yes. And there also were areas where other plans were or were not mentioned, because I know there are other plans being developed, like the Board of Water Supply.
The watershed.
Yep, and the watershed management and things like that, that I think one plan should point to the other. Yeah. And so what were some of the new ideas that are in this plan?
So I think that's why it was great to have the community involved, right? Because I'm not as well versed on sea level rise. And we had people who looked at the maps and went, whoa, I think they should use different maps for sea level rise. So I was grateful for that. And people who were involved in emergency preparedness, they added some of their thoughts to the plan. I think, Bruce, did you?
Yeah. No, that was very good. And I don't think any of the other sustainable plans so far have been able to look at climate change issues. So, and we know that that is one of the major sets of issues that the whole island and the whole state is facing. So for East Honolulu to have an opportunity to be kind of out front in looking at these impacts, I think is really very, very valuable.
Yeah, and our entire, well, we're on an island already, but our entire sustainable plan is along the coastline. and those, the sea level rise. We can see it.
And
we
the king
see it as
tides,
we drive
right.
down Kalanianaole Highway, that things are changing, and the king tides
Right.
At Maunalua Bay.
And I think that's where residents who live in the area can can identify it most accurately when they see the changes. And those are the things that a planner sitting at their desk cannot see. Yeah. So that's why it was important for those folks to also add to the plan. And also for the emergency preparedness, we have like a major corridor running through our Kalanianaole. And if anything happened to block that, Hawaii Kai and the other East Honolulu communities would be cut off. So having those folks in the plan, was very important, I think.
Yes. So what are the next steps? Bruce, you led us through the process of updating. So now what do we do?
So all of these notes and suggestions have been submitted to the Department of Planning and Permitting. I'm not quite sure what their process is going to be from this point on, but what I have suggested to you folks is that you ask of DPP that members of your group continue to work with DPP staff in a collaborative process to finalize this next version of the plan. Because if there isn't that kind of opportunity, and not to fault DPP, but if they are the only arbiters of what that final plan is going to look like, then they can pick and choose from your suggestions and suggested changes. And hopefully they do a good job of incorporating those ideas, but they may not. So I think the process, to me, is not finished yet. Mm-hmm. There's another important collaborative step. I don't think DPP has ever done that with a community group, though, so it'd be a new experience for them.
Do you think there's a chance that they might, or you have no idea?
I think you should, in a reasonable way, I think you should demand that.
Well, I think at our last meeting, we invited our councilman, Tommy Waters, and I believe he's going to go to bat for us to see if we can get that started.
Good.
Yeah, and I believe that even the changes to our vision went in after the deadline, so I think he is asking them to put that in for us.
No, but I put it in my comments.
Oh, great.
So I made it in time.
Okay,
They're
great.
in my comments.
Oh,
okay.
That's fine.
With the short amount of time we have left, are there any last comments you have on the plan, Jeannie?
I think it can be seen as something kind of boring to add to a plan or to read the plan, because it's not an easy read, but it is so important. And that's why I got involved when I saw how comprehensive it is, and if it's not written properly, it could really determine our future in a negative way or a positive way, depending on what's in there. So I think my last statement would be that people should get involved in working on plans and be involved in submitting comments when they're asked for.
Oh, that's great. Great. And Bruce, what about you? Any last comments on the plan?
Well, my general thought is that these sustainable plans, the format, the basic content, has been pretty well set from about 20 years ago. I think, frankly, Oahu communities need a different and better kind of plan. I think there needs to be plans that are much more locally grounded and developed from different groups in the community, and not the preliminary drafts come from the city. I think it should be the other way around. I think it truly should come from the community.
Wow.
It's a more difficult process that way, but I think it'd be much more valuable.
That would be a big change.
Yeah.
And do you have any ideas on how, so for Hawaii Kai, or the Maunalua, East Honolulu plan, our last plan was dated 1999. That doesn't make it much of a living document. Would you break it into smaller areas or different? Any suggestions on that?
Well, that's, for starters, I think that would be important, to have the natural sub-areas developing their own plans and policies. Obviously, there has to be some overall pieces too, in terms of the major urban and suburban systems. But plans need to be local, because that's what's important.
Yes. Yes, as I dug into the plan, I realized how long that process took just for our review process. And I know it had been worked on for a year or more before it got to us. And now here we are months later, 6 months later, and we're still working on the updating process. So by the time we get it finalized, it'll be ready for updating almost, in my mind.
That's probably true.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for speaking about the East Honolulu Sustainable Communities Plan. And I think that's all that we have time for.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to thank you to ŌleloNet and to Livable Hawaii Kai Hui for making Maunalua past, present, and future possible. This is Carol Jaxon signing off.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.